hopefully going to be together uninterrupted for the next 45 minutes. And so what I'll do is I'll guide us through a practice, and then there'll be time for check-ins and any questions you might have about practice or life and how it might, how practice might be able to support you or something like that. Oh, Veronique. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here with the small Sangha. Yeah. And then Tyler says hello. And so the chat box is on your right side. I'm sure some of you have seen it. And feel free to type in any questions or comments you might have after the practice. And then you could even take time to introduce yourself, maybe even add in where you're calling from right now. And so for me, I'm in Longueuil, so not far from Montreal. Sorry, just grabbing this. So yeah, doing something like that helps to create a sense of Sangha, especially if we're not able to see each other's faces right now. So for our practice together of about 25 minutes or so, what I was thinking that we could explore together. Oh, Point St. Charles, Sud-West. Nice. Thanks, Charles. What I thought we could be doing together is just a sort of practice that in many ways helps us step out of, say, fixing mind or repairing mind, just in case you are finding yourself trapped in that mind. You might not even notice that you're in that pattern or habit, but you might notice something like that a lot of things are wrong or need improvement, especially if you're at home and then you're seeing the same things over and over the whole time. Or maybe it's with loved ones, like a partner or a family member, that suddenly they're just getting on your nerves or something like that, which I think is normal given the circumstances that we're living in right now. It's not to say that it's bad and that you should be another way. No. But it might mean that you have a narrow point of focus right now. And so we're going to just try to enlarge it with our practice. In the long run, that's what my practice has helped me do. But in this practice today, we're going to intentionally do that. As well as I've been really sitting with these words that one of our guest teachers, so we brought in Lama Rod Owens in February. And one thing he said, I took a weekend online workshop with him recently, and one thing he said was, we must release the notion of solidity in order to access spaciousness. And so same thing, I think solidity can creep into our lives or ways of thinking in very subtle ways. We might be creating our own suffering by thinking that living in quarantine is now permanent or solid. Or we may be feeling lots of feelings about how we're living right now, thinking that that way of living, say, being able to go out whenever we wanted, wherever, with whoever, was solid and now no longer is. Ways of thinking as well that could creep in, that could cause suffering, that may appear to be solid, is that you should be feeling a certain way. If anybody has been following social media, you might have been seeing some messages that talk about being super productive all of a sudden now that you're home. Or if you're, say, like on Instagram, everyone's baking bread when all you can do right now is sit on the couch, Netflix, and eat bread. And so I just feel like sometimes we think also we need to be a certain way when none of it is really solid. And as a result, they will arise, persist, or stay for a while, and then they'll go away at some point, or things will change. I think another part of our suffering is mostly based on our relationship to what is happening. So one is thinking that something is solid and that it should stay a certain way. When we realize that it isn't solid, then we still have this relationship of almost being attached or resisting what is. And then we might even be projecting happiness onto something like happiness onto baking bread instead of eating it all, happiness on being able to go out, happiness on the partner who magically does the dishes without being asked, etc. And so when we project our happiness onto these external factors or conditions, most likely we'll be disappointed at some moment. Mostly because, not because any of this is bad necessarily, but mostly because those are just very temporary or ephemeral kinds of satisfactions or circumstances or experiences. Meaning that it's kind of like the Buddha would sometimes say, that's the candy, that's the immediate gratification. In some ways, we can even think of it as like the Band-Aid. But the real long-lasting gratification comes from this wise understanding, this wise relationship, that this is what it's like right now, even though we might not like it, but this is what it's like right now. And so today's or this afternoon's practice will be centered around that somewhat. So set yourself up comfortably in whatever position is calling you right now. Seated, standing, lying down perhaps. And if you have the space, you might want to do walking. You don't need access to the video, just audio, so you know when this ends. Feel free to take a few deep breaths before you settle in completely into your pose. And whenever you're ready to close your eyes, if at all, go ahead. Otherwise, you can keep your eyes downcast with a soft gaze. Eventually closing them if that calls you. If there are any parts of your body that are feeling tense, invite them to relax. You can scan the body from head to toe. Or use words like, may this body relax, or may I relax. It's very possible and completely normal that your body may tense up throughout this practice. And if that's the case, simply re-invite the body to relax. Even if you have to invite the body to do so dozens of times, that's okay. The body's relearning a new way of being. Feel the support of your chair, bed perhaps, floor. Tuning into the parts of the body that are pressing down into these surfaces. While also tuning into how the earth or these supports are pressing up into you to hold you, to support you here. So sensing into that relationship. Now become aware of your body as a whole. At first, notice the parts of the body that are attracting your attention the most. As well as still tuning into the body, pressing down into your support, and the support pressing up into you. Now become aware of your breath. If that is a welcome place for you to be. For some, the breath could be triggering or agitating, in which case you might choose sound instead of the breath. And so for a few moments, shifting your awareness or focus to the breath. Following the rise and fall, the in and out, and anything else you might notice about the breath. It's very possible that your breath isn't exactly how you might want it to be, but can it be okay exactly as it is? So, not changing it, not judging it, accepting it, even if you might not like it. Once again, we'll shift our awareness to include both the body resting on your support and your breath moving in and out. So, for a few moments, think of it as 50-50. 50% of your awareness on the body, 50% on the breath. You might figure out your own percentage or own way of working with it. Like between each breath, you tune into the body. As best you can in a very relaxed way, shifting gently and quite naturally back and forth. Again, not judging, not trying to alter, adjust, fix. Just being with as best you can. Cultivating a tolerance for any discomfort. Begin to sense into the body once again, still keeping part of your attention on the breath, but starting to tune into things like, are you more on your right buttock or left buttock? If you're standing, it could be your feet instead, or if you're lying down, which side of the body is pressing more deeply into the ground? Notice if you adjusted right away. And if so, can you relax? And if you didn't adjust yet, that's completely fine. Instead, can you move out of fixing mind? Just notice that there might be an imbalance. And can you rest in that? Can it be okay that it's not perfect? It's not exactly as you'd like. It might even be uncomfortable. And for the last time, we'll shift our awareness to include more yet again. This time, 40% of your awareness is on the body, and as best you can, not moving or adjusting. 40% on the breath, and also not adjusting the breath to be a certain way, not judging it. And now 20% being on the sounds and movements going on around you. So not shutting them out, but letting them come in and out of your practice, arising and falling. Not good or bad. They just are these natural phenomena that are arising. And as you allow them to be part of your experience, it doesn't mean you need to like them. There are just a few minutes left to our practice. So if you need to recommit in any way by sitting up a little bit taller, taking a few deep breaths, go ahead and do so. You can gently open your eyes. And if bowing is part of your practice, go ahead and bow. And so we have about 15 minutes to ask questions if you have any, share about your practice, complain about something, and we'll see how that can be wrapped into practice as well. Really, whatever, this time is yours or for you. And you can pop in any comments or suggestions or whatever questions in the chat box, and I'll read them and answer or comment on them. And while that might be happening, so someone might be typing, just to share a little bit of background on the practice that we just did. This idea of splitting up our awareness is something that really resonated with me and is inspired by one of my teachers in Burma, Sayadaw U Tejaniya. And really, though, when he would suggest it, it was about integrating mindfulness in daily life. And he would say, the idea when you're back out in the world after retreat is not to be 100% mindful, or not to be as mindful as you might be when you're on a meditation retreat, but rather to be 50-50. Spend 50% of your awareness on, say, the body sitting here as you're answering emails or something like that, and 50% on answering emails. And so I really like that suggestion because it just allowed for more fluidity and flexibility. But then when I would practice my meditation, I noticed that sometimes if I aim to have a high, say, percentage of concentration or mindfulness, what would happen is that I would get tight and rigid. I would almost see things like sounds or movements going on around me as obstacles to my practice, as opposed to wrapping it into my practice as well. I would often get caught in fixing mind, trying to make notes to myself of like, oh, I'm going to post my schedule on the fridge so people know when to be quiet around me or something like that. And yet we can't control all of the conditions or circumstances. And so I started playing with this idea of like splitting up my attention, which isn't as mindful, because mindful is the through line from those three things: my body, my breath, and also the sounds and movements around me. And that felt a lot more spacious inside for me, as well as fluid, welcoming, and easier to integrate once the timer went off. So that's a little bit of where it came from. Tyler wrote, "This is the first time I have practiced in the middle of the day. Yeah, I usually practice in the morning and or evening. I found I was very distracted." Yeah, that's completely normal. Not a lot of people succeed at practicing at this time, if succeed is the right word. Because for me, I like personally practicing in the mornings, because when I'm still a little sleepy, when I haven't, say, gotten dressed yet or showered or any of that stuff, I find I'm still closer to the calm state of sleepiness that allows me to really be grounded and present. Generally speaking, it's not always like that, but generally speaking, when I practice in the mornings. I personally don't practice at night because I'm a person who in the evening, if my head hits the pillow, I'm out like a light within within a few seconds. So I don't really have a hard time falling asleep. And so maybe because I've just been go, go, go all day long. So by the time I slow down in the evening, it's usually to sleep. So I personally don't practice in the evening. And then for practicing in the middle of the day, some people do it, especially if, say, they have a really stressful job or something like that. Or now that a lot of us are working from home, it's a way to create a boundary to cut up the day, so that whatever you might have been going through throughout the day doesn't get integrated into your life at home. So for example, if you had a challenging discussion with a coworker and you're still feeling kind of tight about that, you might be able to get a little bit more space with an after work or afternoon meditation, instead of, say, bringing that into any relationships you might have in the evening or interactions. That's just like a general, like for some people who do like practicing in the afternoon, that's what they like. Also, afternoon is hard for some people because after eating lunch, we're sleepy. It's harder for us to track the mind when it wanders, etc. So that could be another part of the reason why some folks might not practice in the afternoon, or they might find themselves distracted, as you mentioned, Tyler. But one thing is, we're not necessarily trying to aim for a certain type of practice, like one that's less agitated or more agitated or anything like that. We're really trying to practice being with whatever is arising. Like, so say for you, it's the distraction, but in a way that doesn't judge it. So I had mentioned throughout the guidance this afternoon, can you be with it or can you allow it? But it doesn't mean you have to like it. And so that could apply for the agitation, like not liking it, but acknowledging like, okay, well, this is what it's like right now. And in some ways, it's like, if, say, this was the only time you got to practice and it was agitated or whatnot, it's better than no practice at all, in my opinion. I'm trying to think. There was something else that I had wanted to mention, but it's slipping my mind. But yeah, those are just some thoughts. Thanks for that, Tyler. Hopefully you'll give it a try again. And sometimes the body and mind will get used to it, like, oh, okay, well, this is just something we do in the afternoons now. Because I know for me, my body was just like, what do you mean we're meditating? we were just sleeping. Why can't we just go back to sleep? And so it took me a while for my mind and body to get used to, like, no, this is something new we're trying. Are there any other questions or comments, observations, complaints, anything? Veronique says, I found that when I went to the breath, because I was mostly with sound, I also touched in the body. Breath and body were together mostly. Yeah, that's how I experienced it as well, because I feel like the mindfulness of the breath is really just a different extension, pardon, of mindfulness of the body. Because when we're mindful of the breath, mostly, in my opinion, we're being with the breath, or a lot of times at least, we're being with the breath, say, as it rises and descends at the chest, or maybe we feel it in the side body where it's expansion and contraction, or at the nostrils, it could be cold when it goes in and warm when it comes out. So different ways we can be with the breath. And a lot of those are really feeling the body as the breath moves in and out. So it is, in my opinion, when taught like that, an expression of mindfulness of the body. Mindfulness of the breath, to be a little bit more technical, could be breathing in. I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. So there are phrases like that you can use that come from the Buddhist teachings. Or even when I breathe in a long breath or a long inhale, I know that I'm breathing in a long inhale. So even touching into some of the qualities like that. But that's not my preferred way of being with the breath personally. And maybe one of the other TNI teachers could offer some other insight or a different perspective. But when I breathe, when I'm with the breath in that way, even though I'm tuning into the qualities of it, like breathing in, I know I'm breathing in, etc., it still feels like a very mental practice for me, when I find a lot of value dropping just into the body. I'm sure it's partly because I don't have a lot of experience, or I haven't practiced being with the breath like that, because I'm sure you can be with the breath, feeling the long inhale in a way where you are taken out of the thinking or the words of it. But that's just not how I've been practicing for these years. Yeah. So anyways, all that to say, Veronique, that really resonates with me, your comment. And so just a little time check. We have 4 minutes left. If there are any other comments or questions. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for coming by, and hopefully you'll pass by again in the afternoon. Maybe after a few tries, it'll be different. Being with sound makes you tolerant. Can you elaborate on that? Veronique. I love that. What did I say? So I was reading your comment about being with sounds makes you tolerant. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on that exactly. And then I'm happy to comment, but I'm just not too sure what you mean. If you're asking me if it makes me more tolerant, or if that's your experience, that you've become more tolerant, and kind of like, what do you mean by tolerant as well? Okay. So Veronique wrote, because lots of sounds are not what we choose in the city. Exactly. Yeah. And so it can go a few ways being with sounds. One is exactly as you report, where some people have just this ease. Yeah, they kind of just like surrender. They don't necessarily accept, but it's more like this surrender because in the city, there's a lot more people, let's say, and it's harder um, to impose a preference on sound. Uh, or it could just be totally aggravating for some people where they may not be able to be with sound at all. A few things that I've noticed with sound, for some reason, it's like really seductive in the sense that we tend to jump towards what are good sounds or appropriate sounds and what are inappropriate sounds, depending, say, on our mood. So, especially when we're practicing, certain sounds could be just like inappropriate, and we could be completely appalled as to why they might be happening. I think of this is happening a little less now, at least the last couple weeks, of construction sounds in Montreal, which is like very common. And that's one sound that I just couldn't, like, I still have a hard time, even though I really work with that sound a lot. So I find that sometimes what's interesting is that when I'm meditating, construction sounds not cool with me, but yet something like bird singing, that's always welcome, or very welcome for me. And so I know that I have these categories, and what I'm trying to do is settle back and instead really be with unpleasant, pleasant, and not responding or not getting pulled out into trying to control the sound in any way. So Veronique says, I'm outside right now, and the sea of cars is like the ocean. I kind of like it. That's really beautiful, actually. And sometimes it's really just a matter of perspective. For example, when I would hear a lot of sirens, like fire truck sirens or police car sirens, that was really like my body would just really contract around it. I found it really hard to be with. Now, the sound itself is still not very pleasant for me, but I'm able to be with it more because I think of, may whoever, like if it's an ambulance, may whoever you're going to go see or whatnot, may they be happy. May you be safe. Like I think of the drivers as well. So I've switched it up in a way where um, that is now not necessarily pleasant, but something that I don't resist as much. And unintentionally, I have an alarm clock where you can set the sound to several different things, and I chose birds. And this is maybe like the reverse reaction to it. But so the bird, when I hear the bird singing, that means my alarm is going off, I wake up, etc. But I don't travel with my alarm clock, and I'm often, when I'm at retreat centers, at least I'm often in these nature settings, and then the birds start singing early, and because I'm kind of conditioned to that, I wake up. But sometimes I wake up 2 hours before I need to wake up, and so sometimes I'm like, oh, you birds. And so it's like a different unintentional conditioning. I've since stopped using that alarm clock so that I can continue being happy and grateful for birds singing, as a side note. So, yeah. All right, friends, that's our time together today. I'll be back next week at the same time. So, wishing you safety, protection, compassion, and and be well. Stay warm the last few days, maybe of cold weather, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thanks.